Okay, we're going to plug on, and it's session 4, setting food and fibre up for success, or a successful future. We have 2 speakers, Adam Barker from Scarlatti and Chris Parsons and Alan Nelson representing the rural leaders. So first it's Adam, and he's talking about our vocational excellence framework.
Kia ora koutou. I'm going to also stand behind the lectern because, like Michelle earlier, I've got a couple of notes up here that I'm really relying heavily on. Before I begin too, I just want to reflect on a question that actually Vaughan asked me before we came here today at breakfast. He sort of asked me, do you get nervous presenting? And I was thinking, no, I don't normally get nervous presenting, but what I do get nervous about is the questions at the end. And I thought there's 2 scenarios that could actually go very badly. The first of those is a really hard question. And that scenario, fortunately, is actually going to be covered for me because this piece of work was done jointly between Scarlatti and Skills Consulting. And so any hard questions, you can direct to Josh, who will be very happy to answer those. He's tried to negotiate sort of half the bottle of wine already, so that seems only reasonable. The other scenario where things could go badly wrong is that awkward silence at the end of the presentation where no one has any questions to ask. And so I have tried to preempt that one by actually, I've got some homework for you guys. So this is sort of something that you need to be thinking about right now, is how could you sort of communicate a very difficult idea or to other people in the vocational sector. So I'd like you to reflect on your greatest successes at trying to sort of communicate and inspire within the sector and be ready to share those at the end. Okay, so this session is in sort of 3 parts. I'd like to try and argue that the Food and Fibre Cove has a problem. And actually I'd like to acknowledge the Concove team here as well because I think they've probably got the same challenge as well. Talk a little bit about the sort of the attempt that we've made so far to try and solve that problem, and then to try and sort of engage your help to try and sort of see what we could do to take that solution out further. So this fine piece of wording is taken directly from the Food and Fibre Cove website, and it talks a little bit about what the Cove is trying to do. And I think you can sort of see the bolded words, to ensure excellence. And so that begs the question, well, what is excellence? I'd like to sort of hold that thought for a second. In doing what the Cove is set out to try and do, it's put into a role of trying to sort of lead the wider vocational education and training system. And you can imagine that that's going to be a hard job. The Food and Fibre Cove is a relatively small organisation with admittedly some very clever and powerful friends, but nevertheless a small organisation. And it's got to try and sort of motivate, I won't say eat the elephant, but in this case sort of lead the elephant to try and sort of work in a direction that is going to make it more excellent. And it's only got limited tools at its disposal. It's got sort of a few $1 million over the course of a few years to try and invest in what's largely been sort of project-based work to try and sort of do that. And that has clear limitations. There's only so many projects you can work on. There's only so many people you can actually reach by doing that. So that model will come up against constraints. There is, however, another way to try and tackle that, which is to try and, I guess, be the advocate, the champion, the cheerleader for excellence, and try to actually sort of motivate and encourage others to try and work in that direction, use their own resources, use their own ideas to try and sort of head that way. To do that, though, it obviously requires us to try and sort of figure out what excellence actually is. And so if I asked you the sort of question to try and sort of give me a one-liner, what is excellence in vocational education, I'm willing to bet that a lot of you can think about something that should be included in that, or you've got some ideas about sort of how you could make something more excellent. But it's not easy, well, we certainly didn't find it easy to go out there and find a single place that could sort of write down in one place what excellence actually looks like. One framework, one definition, one paper. If that exists, it eluded us and eluded Josh and his team when we went looking for it. But what we did find was sort of certainly things that took us in that direction. So, let me jump over that. So we've made a crack at trying to do this. We've said, well, let's try to make our own framework to try and work in this direction. So we sort of said, what would some design principles be of an excellence framework? So something that integrates, I guess, the sort of perspectives of researchers and of practitioners. Something that would take in international wisdom but sort of try to apply that very much in a local context. Something that set a high bar, and that's really important. We can very easily describe what sort of good looks like or even mediocre looks like, but we wanted to try and sort of deliberately set this up in a way that it encourages us to look higher. To be modular, I guess, in the same way that sort of Craig has come up and talked about sort of what he might aspire to in sort of new pathways, training pathways, we would sort of argue that something similar applies here. And it's got to be something that's adaptive. It's got to be a living document. It's got to be able to evolve and improve over time. The process we went through to try and do that, this is the part that Josh and team led, a literature review. He reliably informs me that they did not use quills and parchment paper to try and do that, but nevertheless a great literature review of international work in this area was done. Then we started sort of looking for sort of trying different ways to sort of slice and dice elements of vocational training. We came up with a way of dividing it which sort of looked at sort of the people parts, the training parts or the provision parts, and then the systems and processes that sat behind the system. And then a further framework that, again, Josh and team contributed was this idea of availability, accessibility, acceptability, and adaptability. And we started using that as a way of trying to sort of identify different types of traits, different types of attributes of the system. That evolved. We added another dimension to this, which was sort of a continuum from acceptable, good to great. And importantly, we sort of benchmarked this to say that sort of what we have today, by and large, we said was acceptable. So we didn't allow there to be too many examples of good or too many examples of great or excellent. We wanted to try and sort of set the standard high, and that's the way we chose to do it. We then took the literature review, we massaged it into that sort of three-dimensional sort of framework there, and then we sort of talked about that with a lot of people. Some of you in the room would have been part of that consultation process where we got feedback, and so this was very much the take the researcher perspective and then try to sort of overlay the practitioner's perspective. And what we sort of came up with in the end was a really exciting looking kind of document, like this. Yeah. We actually had about sort of 12 pages of these. So what we tried to do was sort of try to divide them up into different sort of topic areas, and we sort of worked to try and sort of define what we thought looked like acceptable, what looked like good, what looked like excellent. We found in the sort of the process of doing that this sort of 4A's framework sort of fell away a little bit, and we tried to sort of create sort of different titles and categories, but sort of what's on the left-hand side there is very much sort of the descendant of what started off with that quadruple A framework. In terms of actually applying all of this, and I guess this is really, we're sort of getting to the business end of sort of your homework and where I'm hoping you might be able to help me, is how do we actually sort of use something like that? So one of the ways that the Cove has used it is to try and sort of inform the design of the business cases and the program project descriptions that have been developed. And the project teams have been asked to try and sort of take the framework and adapt it and use it in the course of their projects. Some projects have used that, others haven't. And it's a way of actually being used, it's been incorporated too into sort of the monitoring and evaluation framework for actually not just the Food and Fibre Cove, but actually for the Construction Cove as well. There's been a bit of sort of sharing around sort of the evaluation frameworks between the two coves, and in an indirect way this work is sort of fed into that. But the problem, the sort of the challenge, I think, is sort of probably reasonably obvious. A document like that is not designed to inspire. It's not designed to try and sort of actually cause people to sort of change behaviours or think about necessarily sort of doing things in radically different ways. And so I'd be interested in any thoughts that anybody had about ways that could be either repackaged, incorporated into other work, taken in a different direction. Anything that you could think of that the Food and Fibre Cove could do with this, I guess, set of definitions to try and sort of evangelise this throughout the sort of the training system. So this is the moment where you're going to try and hopefully show me wrong, that the awkward silence bit isn't going to occur. Has anyone got any thoughts at all that you might be able to throw into the room?
Adam, is there anyone that is actually using the rubrics as they stand at the moment?
Well, we are for our own projects. So we've...
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh. Yeah.
The microphone.
Is there anyone who's currently using the rubrics in the room? Apart from us, obviously.
Sandy?
Sandy, you're using it? Do you want to comment on that?
We've been looking at, we're using it to review our programs, and so just go through the rubric and see how we're going in terms of, you know, things like online engagement, that sort of thing. And we're thinking about also introducing it into our peer review of tutor staff, just to see where they are in terms of those various aspects of the rubric. So I think, you know, we want to make it something that is used. It's not something that just sits on the shelf. So we're looking to see how we can incorporate it into a lot of aspects of our business.
Thanks, Andy.
Right. Jacinta, did you have one? Oh, okay. Change your mind?
All right. Welcome any ideas over drinks later on. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Adam.